The September rain hammered against the windows of Rosewood Memorial Chapel in Beverly Hills, each drop echoing the hollow ache in my chest. I sat in the back row, watching my half-siblings orchestrate our father's funeral like I was a stranger who'd wandered in from the street. Which, in their eyes, I suppose I was. "Maria, you're in the wrong section," my half-sister Victoria hissed, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the mahogany pew. At 35, she'd perfected the art of looking down on people despite being shorter than most. "Family sits in the front." The irony wasn't lost on me. After 28 years of being Robert Harrison's daughter, I was apparently not family enough to mourn him properly. I watched as Victoria's Hermes heels clicked across the marble floor, her black Chanel dress probably costing more than most people's monthly rent. Everything about her screamed old money, from her perfectly straightened blonde hair to the way she spoke through her teeth. "Let her sit wherever she wants," came a voice from behind me. I turned to see my half-brother Marcus, 32 and built like the college football player he used to be. His face was flushed, and I could smell the whiskey on his breath even from 3 feet away. "She's barely family anyway." The words stung, but I'd heard variations of them my entire life. Ever since my mother, Elena Vasquez, had married my father when I was 8, I'd been the outsider. The daughter of the Mexican housekeeper who'd somehow enchanted their powerful father. Never mind that my mother had been the head of housekeeping at Dad's hotel chain, or that she'd put herself through night school to become a certified hospitality manager. To them, she was just the help who'd gotten lucky. "Marcus, please," whispered my youngest half-sibling, Diana. At 25, she was the closest to me in age, but the gap between us felt like an ocean. She'd inherited Dad's gentle eyes but Victoria's sharp tongue. "Not here. Not today." I pulled my black cardigan tighter around my shoulders, suddenly feeling underdressed in my simple black dress from Target. The chapel was filled with Beverly Hills elite, politicians, business moguls, socialites who'd never worked a day in their lives but wielded influence like weapons. They whispered behind their programs, stealing glances at the grieving family, probably wondering why the obviously Latina woman was sitting alone in the back. The funeral director, a thin man with nervous energy, approached Victoria with a clipboard. "Ms. Harrison, we need to finalize the arrangements for the burial. The family cars are ready, but we need to confirm the guest list for the private reception." Victoria's eyes found mine across the chapel. "The immediate family only." "Mrs. Harrison," she paused, the title sounding like poison on her tongue. "And her daughter won't be attending." My breath caught. They were excluding me from my own father's burial reception. I stood up, my legs shaking with a mixture of grief and rage. "Excuse me, but I have every right, you have the right to attend the funeral," Victoria interrupted, her voice carrying across the chapel. Several heads turned. "But the reception is for family members who were actually involved in Daddy's life. People who didn't abandon him for some community college in Phoenix." The accusation hit like a physical blow. Yes, I'd moved to Phoenix after high school to attend Arizona State University on a scholarship. Yes, I'd stayed to build my career as a social worker, helping families navigate the child welfare system. But I'd never abandoned my father. We'd talked every Sunday, texted constantly, and I'd visited every Christmas and birthday. The distance had been geographical, not emotional. "I didn't abandon anyone," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "I built a life. I have a career helping families." "Oh, please," Marcus scoffed, swaying slightly. "Playing social worker with your little state salary while we actually helped Dad run his empire. You think your community college degree makes you qualified to understand what he built?" The chapel had gone silent except for the rain against the windows. I could feel dozens of eyes on me, waiting to see if the outsider would cause a scene. My face burned with embarrassment and anger. These people had watched me grow up, had seen me struggle to find my place in a family that never quite accepted me, and now they were witnessing my final humiliation. "I think," came a new voice from the front of the chapel, "you're all forgetting something important." I turned to see James Morrison, my father's longtime attorney, approaching with purposeful steps. At 62, he carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who'd spent decades handling the affairs of the wealthy and powerful. His silver hair was perfectly styled despite the rain, and his dark suit looked expensive but understated. "Mr. Morrison," Victoria said, her voice suddenly sweet as honey. "We were just discussing the arrangements, I heard," he said quietly, his eyes scanning the crowd. "And I think we need to have a conversation. All of us." His gaze settled on me. "Maria, would you mind staying after the service? There are some matters we need to discuss." Victoria's expression shifted from sweet to suspicious. "What kind of matters?" "We've already gone over Daddy's will. Everything's been settled." James Morrison's smile was enigmatic. "Not everything, Ms. Harrison. Not everything." The service began with a eulogy from Reverend Matthews, who'd known my father for 30 years. He spoke about Robert Harrison's charitable work, his business acumen, his devotion to family. But as I listened, I realized he was describing a man I knew intimately, the father who'd helped me with math homework, who'd taught me to drive in the empty parking lot of his first hotel, who'd cried with pride when I graduated college. Robert was a man who believed in justice, Reverend Matthews continued, his voice carrying over the packed chapel. He believed that actions had consequences, that loyalty should be rewarded, and that family wasn't just about blood, it was about love, commitment, and showing up when it mattered. I felt tears streaming down my face, not just from grief but from a deep sense of recognition. That was my father. The man who'd called me every Sunday without fail, who'd sent care packages during my college exams, who'd flown to Phoenix to attend my graduation when his other children couldn't be bothered. After the service, the crowd began to disperse. I watched as my half-siblings were surrounded by mourners offering condolences, talking about business deals and social obligations. They looked like royalty holding court, accepting sympathy with practiced grace. I was standing alone by the guest book when James Morrison appeared beside me. "Maria," he said quietly, "I know today has been difficult. Your father would be heartbroken to see how you've been treated." "Would he?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Because sometimes I wonder if he really saw me as his daughter or just an obligation. James's expression softened. "Your father loved you deeply. More than you know. And he was very aware of how his other children treated you." He paused, looking toward Victoria, Marcus, and Diana as they posed for photos with mourners. "Walk with me to my car. There's something you need to know before tomorrow's will reading." As we stepped outside, the September rain had softened to a gentle drizzle. The Beverly Hills streets glistened under the streetlights, and I could smell the expensive perfume and cigar smoke from the departing mourners. "Maria," James said as we reached his black Mercedes, "your father made some decisions in his final months that might come as a surprise to everyone. He was very deliberate about his choices." "What kind of decisions?" He pulled out a manila envelope from his briefcase. "He named you as the sole executor of his estate." The world seemed to tilt. "What?" "His will is complex, but the bottom line is this: you have complete control over how his assets are distributed. Every business decision, every charitable donation, every family inheritance, it all goes through you." I stared at the envelope, my hands trembling. But Victoria and Marcus, they've been running the hotels with him. They know the business. They know how to spend money and throw their weight around," James said dryly. "Your father was very specific about why he chose you. He said you were the only one who understood the value of hard work, who'd built something meaningful with your life, who'd shown real compassion for others." The rain was getting heavier again, and I could hear the distant sound of car doors slamming as the funeral reception began at the family estate, the reception I'd been excluded from. "James, I don't understand. If Dad wanted me to have this responsibility, why didn't he tell me? Why let them treat me like I was nothing?" "Because he wanted to see their true colors," James replied. "He wanted to see how they'd treat you when They thought you had no power. He wanted to know who they really were when they thought no one was watching. I thought about the years of subtle exclusion, the family photos I wasn't invited to, the business conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Had my father been testing them all along? What happens now? I asked. Tomorrow, we read the will. Your siblings think they're inheriting everything equally. They have no idea that you control their financial futures. He handed me the envelope. Your father left you a letter. I suggest you read it tonight. As I walked to my rental car, I could see the lights of the Harrison family estate in the distance. The sprawling mansion where I'd spent my teenage years, where I'd never quite felt at home, where my half-siblings were probably toasting their father's memory and planning how to spend their inheritance. They had no idea that their world was about to change. I drove back to my hotel room at the Marriott. I'd been staying there instead of at the family home, another subtle reminder that I wasn't really welcome. The room was small but comfortable, a stark contrast to the opulence I'd grown up around. I ordered room service and sat on the bed, staring at the envelope James had given me. Inside was a letter in my father's familiar handwriting. My dearest Maria, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I suspect your siblings have shown you exactly who they are. I'm sorry for that, but I needed to know the truth. You were always the daughter of my heart, even when you weren't the daughter of my blood. Your mother brought you into my life when I needed you most, and watching you grow into the woman you've become has been my greatest joy. I've watched Victoria, Marcus, and Diana their entire lives. I've given them everything, the best schools, endless opportunities, financial security. But I've never seen them give anything back. They take, and they've never learned the value of earning something through their own efforts. You, on the other hand, have built a life of service. You help families in crisis. You understand that wealth is a responsibility, not just a privilege. That's why I'm entrusting you with everything I built. Use this power wisely. Be fair, but don't be foolish. Your siblings will try to manipulate you, to make you feel guilty for having what they think should be theirs. Remember that they excluded you from my funeral reception. Remember how they treated you when they thought you had nothing, but also remember that you're better than they are. You have the chance to be the person they never learned to be. Use that chance. I love you, Mija. Make me proud. Dottie read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. All those years of feeling like I didn't belong, of wondering if my father really loved me, of watching my siblings inherit his attention and affection, it had all been a test. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Hope you understand why you couldn't come to the reception. It's just family business. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, see you at the will reading tomorrow. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they'd find out that the daughter they'd spent years excluding was about to control their entire future. Tomorrow, the real family business would begin. But tonight, I mourned not just my father's death, but the end of the family I'd always hoped we could be. Tomorrow, I'd have to decide what kind of family we would become. The law offices of Morrison, Blackwell and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a gleaming building in Century City, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Los Angeles. I arrived 20 minutes early, partly from nerves and partly because I'd barely slept the night before. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 40s, offered me coffee and directed me to the elegant waiting area with its leather chairs and mahogany tables. I was flipping through a copy of Fortune magazine when the elevator doors opened and my half-siblings emerged like a perfectly coordinated storm. Victoria wore a cream-colored Armani suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe chignon. Marcus had traded his funeral suit for charcoal gray Brioni, his usually disheveled appearance now sharp and business-ready. Diana brought up the rear in navy blue Prada, her dark hair styled in soft waves. That made her look younger than her 25 years. Maria, Victoria said, her voice carrying the same false sweetness I'd heard at the funeral. I'm surprised to see you here so early. I thought you might have flown back to Phoenix already. Dad's will reading seemed important enough to stay. 4, I replied, closing the magazine and setting it on the table with deliberate calm. Marcus dropped into the chair across from me, his cologne overwhelming in the small space. Look, I know yesterday was awkward, but you have to understand, the family business is complicated. There are things you don't know about, investments and partnerships that require discretion. What Marcus means, Diana added, settling beside him, is that we want to make sure you're taken care of. We've been talking, and we think Dad probably left you something nice. Maybe the house in Palm Springs, or a trust fund. I studied their faces, noting the confident way they spoke, the assumptions they made. They'd clearly spent the evening planning how to handle their father's estate, probably dividing up his hotels, his real estate investments, his stock portfolio. They spoke about me like I was a distant relative who might receive a small inheritance. Out of obligation. We want you to know, Victoria continued, that we don't hold any grudges. We know you and Dad were close in your own way. We're prepared to be generous. The word generous hung in the air like a challenge. They were prepared to be generous with money they assumed was theirs, prepared to throw me some scraps from their father's fortune. That's very thoughtful of you, I said, my voice carefully neutral. James Morrison appeared in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Good morning, everyone. Are we ready to begin? The conference room was impressive, a long table that could seat 20 people, surrounded by leather chairs and lined with law books. James sat at the head of the table, a thick folder in front of him. Victoria, Marcus, and Diana took seats on one side, while I sat across from them, feeling like I was facing a tribunal. Before we begin, James said, adjusting his reading glasses, I want to make sure everyone understands the gravity of what we're discussing today. Robert Harrison's estate is valued at approximately $47 million. This includes his hotel properties, real estate investments, stock portfolio, and various business interests. Victoria's eyes lit up. Even Diana, who usually tried to stay out of financial discussions, leaned forward with interest. Marcus cracked his knuckles, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. Now, James continued, Robert's will is somewhat unconventional. He spent considerable time crafting it, and he was very specific about his wishes. He opened the folder and pulled out a thick document. I'll read the relevant sections. But first, there's something important you all need to understand about the structure of this estate. He cleared his throat and began reading. I, Robert Harrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. The legal language was dense, but I could follow the basics. Dad had left specific amounts to various charities, the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles, the Hispanic Scholarship Fund, the Phoenix Social Services Foundation where I worked. Hearing that last one made my eyes water. To my daughter Victoria, James continued reading, I leave the sum of $500,000 and my collection of first edition books, knowing her love of literature. Victoria's face fell slightly. $500,000 was a lot of money, but it was a fraction of what she'd expected. To my son Marcus, I leave the sum of $500,000 and my vintage car collection, knowing his appreciation for classic automobiles. Marcus's jaw tightened. He'd been expecting to inherit at least one of the hotels, if not the entire chain. To my youngest daughter Diana, I leave the sum of $500,000 and my jewelry collection, to be held in trust until her 30th birthday. Diana looked confused. But what about the hotels? What about the businesses? James held up a hand. We're not finished. He turned to a new page. To my beloved daughter Maria Elena Harrison, wait, Victoria interrupted. Maria Elena? Dad never called her that. Actually, James said quietly, he legally adopted Maria when she was 12. Her full legal name is Maria Elena Harrison Vasquez, though she's chosen to use Vasquez professionally. The room went silent. I'd known about the adoption, of course. But my half-siblings had never acknowledged it. To them, I was always just Elena's daughter or the stepdaughter. James continued reading, To my beloved daughter Maria Elena Harrison, I leave the remainder of my estate, including all business interests, real estate holdings, and financial investments. Furthermore, I name Maria Elena Harrison as the sole executor of my estate, with full authority to oversee all distributions and business decisions. The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear the air conditioning humming, the distant sound of traffic far below, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. "I'm sorry," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Did you say sole executor?" "That's correct," James replied. "Maria has complete authority over the estate. Any distributions to other beneficiaries must be approved by her. Any business decisions regarding the hotels or investments must be made by her." Marcus shot to his feet. So quickly his chair rolled backward. "That's impossible. She doesn't know anything about the business. She's been gone for 10 years. "Actually," I said, finding my voice, "I've been gone for 10 years building a career and a life. I've been managing multi-million-dollar budgets for social services, overseeing complex caseloads, making decisions that affect hundreds of families. I think I can handle a hotel chain." "This is insane," Victoria said, her composure finally cracking. "Daddy couldn't have been in his right mind. We need to contest this. We need to." Robert was evaluated by 3 independent physicians in the months before his death, James interrupted. He was of completely sound mind. He was also very specific about why he made these choices. He pulled out another document. "He left explanations for each of you." He handed Victoria a sealed envelope. "Your father wanted you to read this." Victoria tore it open with shaking hands and read silently, her face going pale. When she finished, she crumpled the letter and threw it on the table. "What did it say?" Diana asked. "It said," Victoria's voice was bitter, "that he was disappointed in how I treated Maria. That he watched me exclude her from family events and business discussions. That he didn't trust me to be fair to her if I controlled the money." Marcus grabbed his own envelope and read quickly. His face flushed red. "He says I'm irresponsible with money. That I've never held a real job, never built anything meaningful. That giving me control of the business would be like giving matches to a child." Diana's letter was shorter, but her tears told the story. "He says I follow Victoria and Marcus blindly. That I've never stood up for what's right, never protected Maria when they were cruel to her." The conference room felt suffocating. My half-siblings stared at me like I'd personally destroyed their lives, while I struggled to process what had just happened. $47 million. Complete control over the family business. The power to determine their financial futures. "There's more," James said quietly. He pulled out a final document. "Your father also left specific instructions about the business operations. Maria, you have several options. You can maintain current management and simply oversee major decisions. You can restructure the business entirely. Or you can sell everything and distribute the proceeds however you see fit." "Sell everything?" Marcus's voice cracked. "Those hotels are our legacy. Our grandfather built the first one with his own hands. And now," Victoria said, her voice dripping with venom, "little Miss Social Worker gets to decide what happens to it all." The way she said social worker made it sound like a dirty word. I thought about the families I'd helped, the children I'd protected, the lives I'd touched in my career. I thought about the letter my father had left me, about his belief that wealth was a responsibility, not just a privilege. "I need time to think," I said. "This is a lot to process." "Time to think?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "You're holding our entire future hostage and you need time to think?" "Your father anticipated this reaction," James said. "Maria, he left instructions that you should take whatever time you need. The estate will continue operating as usual under current management until you're ready to make decisions." I stood up on shaky legs. "I need some air." As I headed for the door, Victoria's voice stopped. Me. Maria, wait. Her tone had shifted from angry to calculating. I know we haven't always gotten along, but we're family. We can work together on this. You don't have to make any drastic changes. I turned back to look at her, this half-sister. Who'd spent decades making me feel unwelcome, who'd excluded me from my own father's funeral reception just 2 days ago. Work together? Like how we worked together on Dad's funeral arrangements? That was different. That was about tradition, that was about keeping me in my place, I said. About making sure I knew I didn't really belong. Diana spoke up, her voice small. We're sorry about that. We were emotional, we weren't thinking clearly. You were thinking very clearly, I replied. You were thinking about how to keep the outsider out. The problem is, I'm not the outsider anymore. I left them sitting in the conference room and walked to the elevators. My hands were shaking as I pressed the button for the lobby. $47 million. The hotels where I'd spent summers as a teenager, learning the business from the ground up. The real estate investments my father had carefully built over decades. The power to change all of their lives with a single decision. Outside, the Los Angeles sunshine felt harsh after the air-conditioned conference room. I walked aimlessly down the street, my mind racing. My phone buzzed with texts from my half-siblings, but I ignored them. I needed to think clearly, and I couldn't do that with them demanding answers I didn't have yet. I found myself in a small cafe, ordering coffee I didn't really want. The barista, a young woman with purple hair and kind eyes, smiled at me. Rough day? You could say that, I replied. Want to talk about it? I'm a good listener. I almost laughed. How could I explain that I'd just inherited a fortune from a father I'd thought didn't really see me as his daughter? That I now controlled the futures of siblings who'd never accepted me? That I had the power to be generous or vindictive, and I wasn't sure which I wanted to be? Just family stuff, I said. Ah, she nodded knowingly. Family's complicated. Blood doesn't always make people treat you right. Her words hit me like a physical blow. Blood doesn't always make people treat you right. But my father's love had been real, even when I doubted it. His letter had made that clear. The question now was what to do with that love, and with the power he'd given me. My phone rang. James Morrison's name appeared on the screen. Maria, he said when I answered, I know this is overwhelming. Your father expected it would be. He wanted me to tell you something. What? He said to remember that power is only as good as what you do with it. And that you've spent your career protecting people who needed protection. He trusted you to know the difference between justice and revenge. After I hung up, I sat in the cafe for another hour, watching people come and go. Families with children, couples holding hands, business people rushing to meetings. Normal people with normal problems, not people dealing with inherited fortunes and family betrayals, but this was my reality now. My father had given me this responsibility. And I couldn't run from it. The question was, what kind of person did I want to be with this power? I thought about Victoria's face when she realized she wouldn't be inheriting the business she'd expected to run. I thought about Marcus's assumption that I couldn't handle the responsibility. I thought about Diana's tears when she read her father's assessment of her character, and I thought about the funeral reception they'd excluded me from, the years of subtle dismissal, the way they'd treated me like I was less than family. Tomorrow, I would have to start making decisions. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out how to balance justice with mercy, how to honor my father's wishes while dealing with siblings who now saw me as their enemy. But today, I was just a daughter mourning her father and trying to understand the gift he'd left her, not just the money, but the chance to rewrite the story of what family could be. 3 days after the will reading. I was sitting in my father's study at the Harrison family estate, surrounded by 3 decades of business records and family photographs. James Morrison had given me the keys along with a warning: your siblings have been calling my office every few hours. They want to meet with you. The study felt like a shrine to my father's life. His mahogany desk, imported from Italy, still held his fountain pen and leather appointment book. The walls were lined with awards from the hospitality industry, photos with mayors and governors, and family pictures spanning 40 years. I found myself staring at one photo in particular, a Christmas morning from when I was 15, all four of us kids around the tree. Victoria and Marcus were opening expensive gifts while Diana and I shared a moment of laughter over something silly. Dad stood behind us, his hand on my shoulder, smiling at the camera. I'd been avoiding my half-siblings since leaving the law office, but I knew the confrontation was inevitable. They'd lost their assumed inheritance and their presumed control, and people like Victoria and Marcus didn't accept defeat quietly. My phone buzzed with yet another text from Victoria. "We need to talk. This is important." Before I could respond, I heard the front door slam shut, followed by the click of expensive heels on marble flooring. Victoria's voice echoed through the house. "Maria? We know you're here. Your rental car is in the driveway." I took a deep breath and called out, "I'm in Dad's study." They appeared in the doorway like a delegation, Victoria in the lead, Marcus beside her, Diana trailing behind with an uncertain expression. Victoria had traded her funeral elegance for a sharp black business suit that meant she was ready for war. "We need to talk," Victoria announced, settling into one of the leather chairs across from the desk. "This whole situation is ridiculous." "Which situation?" I asked, closing the financial report I'd been reviewing. "The situation where Dad left me in charge of his estate, or the situation where you're upset about it?" Marcus moved to the window, his nervous energy filling the room. "Look, Maria, we get it. Dad was trying to make some kind of point. But the practical reality is that you can't run a hotel chain from Phoenix. You don't know the managers, the investors, the day-to-day operations." "Actually," I said, pulling out a folder I'd been studying, "I've spent the last 3 days learning quite a bit about the operations. Did you know that the Beverly Hills location is losing money? Has been for 2 years." Victoria's confident expression faltered. That's temporary. The renovation costs. The renovation that went 40% over budget because nobody was monitoring the contractors?" I interrupted, flipping through the reports. "Or the fact that the restaurant lease was renewed at triple the previous rate because no one negotiated properly?" "Those are minor issues," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Nothing that can't be fixed with proper management." "Proper management," I repeated. "Is that what you call it when you approve a $200,000 consulting fee to a company that doesn't seem to exist? Or when you authorize bonuses for executives while laying off housekeeping staff?" The silence that followed was deafening. I'd spent 3 days diving into the financial records, and what I'd found was disturbing. While the Harrison hotel chain was profitable overall, it was being systematically drained by questionable expenses, inflated contracts, and financial decisions that benefited my half-siblings personally while hurting the business. Diana spoke up, her voice small. "Maria, I think there's been some misunderstanding. We've been trying to preserve Dad's legacy while dealing with some challenging market conditions." "Challenging market conditions?" I pulled out another file. "The consulting company that received $200,000 last year? Its only listed employee is Marcus Harrison. You've been paying yourself consulting fees on top of your executive salary." Marcus's face flushed red. "That's completely legitimate. I provide strategic guidance that's driven. The company's profits down 20% in 2 years?" I stood up, the anger I'd been suppressing finally breaking through. "You've been treating Dad's business like your personal piggy bank while he was dying." "How dare you?" Victoria shot to her feet, her composure finally cracking. "How dare you waltz in here after 10 years and act like you understand anything about what we've sacrificed for this family?" "Sacrificed?" I laughed bitterly. "You mean the sacrifice of living in a $10 million mansion? The sacrifice of having unlimited access to trust funds? The sacrifice of never having to worry about paying for college or finding a job or building a life on your own merit?" We worked in the business, Marcus shouted. We were here every day while you were off playing social worker in Arizona. You were here every day embezzling money and running the business into the ground. I shot back. Do you want to know what else I found? The Miami property that you convinced Dad to buy? The one that was supposed to be a flagship location? It's been empty for 8 months because you never obtained the proper permits before starting construction. Victoria sat back down heavily. That's a temporary setback. A temporary setback that's cost the company $3 million in penalties and lost revenue. I walked around the desk to face them directly. You want to know what sacrifice looks like? Sacrifice is working your way through college while watching your siblings get everything handed to them. Sacrifice is building a career helping families in crisis while your half-siblings throw parties with trust fund money. Sacrifice is loving a father who let his other children treat you like you didn't belong. Dad loved us all equally, Diana said weakly. Did he? I pulled out the letter my father had left me and read aloud. I've watched Victoria, Marcus, and Diana their entire lives. I've given them everything, the best schools, endless opportunities, financial security. But I've never seen them give anything back. I looked up at their stricken faces. He knew exactly who you were. He knew what you'd done to the business. He knew how you treated me. And he made his decision accordingly. The room fell silent except for the ticking of the antique clock on the mantel. Victoria was staring at her hands, Marcus was still facing the window, and Diana was crying quietly. So what now? Victoria asked finally. Are you going to fire us? Sell everything out of spite? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I know I'm not going to let you destroy what Dad built. Marcus turned around, his face hard. You think you're so much better than us, don't you? You think your little social work degree makes you qualified to run a multimillion-dollar business. I think, I said carefully, that I've spent 10 years learning how to manage complex situations, how to make decisions that affect people's lives, how to work with limited resources to achieve meaningful results. I think I've learned things you never bothered to learn. Like what? Like accountability. Like putting other people's needs before your own. Like earning respect instead of demanding it. Victoria stood up again, her business mask back in place. Fine. You win. You have the power, you have the money, you have Dad's blessing from beyond the grave. But you also have 3 siblings who know this business inside and out, who have relationships with investors and managers and clients. You can try to run everything by yourself, or you can work with us. Work with you? I sat back down at my father's desk, feeling the weight of his fountain pen in my hands. The way you worked with me when you planned his funeral? The way you included me in family business discussions? The way you made me feel welcome at family gatherings? We were protecting the family's interests, Victoria said. No, I replied. You were protecting your own interests. There's a difference. Diana wiped her eyes and stood up. Maria, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how we treated you. I'm sorry for going along with Victoria and Marcus when I knew they were wrong. I'm sorry for not standing up for you when you needed family support. Her apology surprised me. Diana had always been the follower, the youngest who went along with whatever her older siblings decided. But there was something different in her voice now, a sincerity I hadn't heard before. I appreciate that, I said. But sorry doesn't fix the financial mess you've made. Sorry doesn't undo years of exclusion. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you only care about my feelings now because I control your money. Marcus walked to the door, then turned back. You know what? You're right. We treated you like an outsider because that's what you were. You chose to leave, chose to build your life somewhere else, chose to stay away from the family business. And now you want to come back and judge us for the choices we made while you were gone. I stayed away, I said quietly, because every time I tried to be part of this family, you made it clear I wasn't welcome. Every business conversation that stopped when I walked into the room. Every family photo I wasn't invited to. Every decision. Made without consulting me. You didn't want me involved then, but now you're angry that I wasn't involved? That's not how it happened, Victoria protested. Isn't it? I opened my laptop and pulled up a file I'd been dreading to create. I spent yesterday going through Dad's phone records. Do you know how many times he called me in the last year? 43 times. Do you know how many times any of you called me? 0. The accusation hung in the air like a challenge. Victoria's mouth opened, then closed without sound. He called me when he was diagnosed with cancer, I continued, my voice getting stronger. He called me when he started chemotherapy. He called me when the treatments weren't working. He called me the night before he died. I looked at each of them. When? Did he call you about his illness? He didn't want to worry us, Diana said weakly. He didn't want to worry you, or you didn't want to be worried? Because I have his medical records right here. The ones that show none of you attended a single doctor's appointment with him. The ones that show his emergency contact was his housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, because he couldn't count on any of you to be available. Marcus's face went pale. We didn't know it was that serious. You didn't know because you didn't ask. You were too busy embezzling money from his business to pay attention to the fact that he was dying. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but they were true. I'd flown to Los Angeles 6 times in the last year to be with my father during his cancer treatments. I'd held his hand during chemotherapy sessions, driven him to appointments, stayed with him when he was too weak to be alone. Meanwhile, his other children had been living their lives, assuming he'd always be there, assuming they'd always have time to pay attention to him later. We visited him, Victoria said defensively. We had dinner with him regularly. Business dinners, I corrected. Dinners where you discussed hotel operations and asked for money. When was the last time any of you just spent time with him? When was the last time you asked how he was feeling, what he was thinking about, what he needed? The silence stretched until Diana spoke up. The night before he died, he called you. What did he say? I closed my eyes, remembering that final conversation. Dad's voice had been weak but determined, and we'd talked for over an hour about everything. Except his illness. He'd asked about my work, my cases, my plans for the future. He'd told me stories about his own father, about building the first hotel, about the mistakes he'd made as a young man. He told me he was proud of me, I said finally. He told me he was sorry for not standing up to you more when we were younger. He told me he wished he'd been braver about showing how much he loved me. Victoria's composure finally cracked completely. Tears streamed down her face as she sank back into the chair. He never said things like that to us. Because you never gave him the chance, I replied. Every conversation was about money, about business, about what you wanted from him. When did you ever just talk to him like he was your father instead of your bank account? Marcus slumped against the wall. We thought we had time. We thought he'd always be there. You thought you'd always have access to his money, I corrected. There's a difference. The confrontation had drained all of us. Victoria looked older than her 35 years, Marcus seemed to have lost his usual swagger, and Diana was openly crying. But I felt something shifting inside me, not satisfaction at their pain, but a strange sense of clarity. I'm not going to fire you, I said finally. But I'm not going to let you continue destroying what Dad built, either. Victoria looked up hopefully. So we can work together? We can try, I said. But there are going to be conditions. Real accountability. Real transparency. Real consequences for the financial mismanagement I've uncovered. What kind of conditions? Marcus asked warily. I pulled out a legal pad where I'd been making notes. First, all consulting fees and executive bonuses are suspended until the company's finances are stable. Second, all major expenditures over $10,000 must be approved by me personally. Third, we're hiring an independent accounting firm to audit every transaction from the past 3 years. You're treating us like criminals, Victoria protested. You've been acting like criminals, I shot back. Marcus, that consulting company you created? That's embezzlement. Victoria, those business expenses you've been charging to the company credit card? Personal shopping trips aren't legitimate business expenses. We can pay it back, Diana said quickly. Whatever we've taken inappropriately, we can pay it back. You're going to pay it back, I agreed. With interest. And you're going to do it by earning legitimate salaries, not by raiding the company coffers. Marcus pushed himself off the wall. And if we don't agree to your conditions? Then I sell everything and distribute the proceeds to charity, I said calmly. Dad gave me that option specifically. He knew this conversation might be necessary. The threat landed like a physical blow. Selling the hotels would mean the end of the Harrison family legacy, the end of their lifestyle, the end of everything they'd built their identities around. You wouldn't, Victoria whispered. Try me, I replied. I've lived for 10 years without Harrison family money. I can live the rest of my life without it, too. Can you? The question hung in the air while they processed the reality of their situation. I held all the cards. I could be generous or vindictive, fair or ruthless. The choice was entirely mine. There's something else, I said, pulling out another document. I've been reviewing the employee records. Do you know that Dad's company used to have a scholarship program for employees' children? A program that was discontinued 3 years ago to reduce operational costs? They didn't answer, but I could see the recognition in their faces. The program cost the company $50,000 a year. Do you know what else cost $50,000 a year? The lease on Marcus's Porsche, which was somehow classified as a business vehicle. Marcus's face flushed red. I need a reliable car for business meetings. You needed a $90,000 sports car for business meetings? While kids who worked in your hotels couldn't afford college? That's not how business works, Victoria said weakly. Maybe not your business, I replied. But it's how Dad's business is going to work going forward. We're reinstating the scholarship program. We're reviewing every employee benefit that was cut in the last 5 years. We're going to remember that the Harrison hotel chain employed real people with real families, not just executive bank accounts. Diana was nodding through her tears. Dad would have wanted that. Dad did want that, I said. That's why he left me in charge instead of you. The room fell silent again. Outside, I could hear the gardener working in the estate's elaborate grounds. The normal sounds of a life continuing despite the family drama unfolding inside. So what happens now? Victoria asked finally. Now you have a choice, I said. You can work with me to rebuild what you've damaged, to honor Dad's memory by actually caring about the people and principles he believed in. Or you can fight me. And I'll exercise my right to sell everything and walk away. And if we work with you? Marcus asked. Then you earn your place in this family business. You prove that you can be trusted with responsibility. You show that you understand the difference between leadership and entitlement. Victoria stood up slowly, her business mask back in place but somehow different now, less arrogant, more uncertain. We'll need time to think about this. You have until tomorrow, I said. I'm meeting with the hotel managers and the accounting firm on Friday. You can either be part of the solution, or you can watch from the sidelines. As they filed toward the door, Diana turned back. Maria, for what it's worth, I think Dad made the right choice. I think he saw something in you that he couldn't see in us. What's that? He saw someone who would fight for what's right, not just for what's profitable. After they left, I sat alone in my father's study, surrounded by the evidence of his life. And his love. The financial records, the family photos, the letter he'd left me, they all told the same story. He'd been watching, evaluating, planning for this moment when his children would have to choose between greed and responsibility. Tomorrow, I would find out what choice my half-siblings would make. Tomorrow, I would begin the real work of honoring my father's legacy. But tonight, I finally understood the gift he'd given me. Not just the money or the power, but the chance to be the person he'd always believed I could be. The person who would choose justice over revenge, who would protect the people who needed protection, who would build something meaningful instead of just consuming what others had built. Tonight, I felt like Robert Harrison's daughter in a way I never had before. And tomorrow, I would show his other children what that really meant. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of the renovated Beverly Hills Harrison Hotel, watching the late afternoon sun stream through the crystal chandeliers my father had installed 20 years ago. The marble floors gleamed, the staff moved with purpose and pride, and the registration desk buzzed with the energy of a business that was finally thriving again. The quarterly numbers are in, Diana said, approaching with a tablet in her hands and a smile on her face. We're up 37% from last year. It had been a long 6 months. After our confrontation in Dad's study, my half-siblings had chosen to work with me, though not without significant growing pains. Victoria had been the most resistant, fighting me on every operational change until the independent audit revealed the full extent of the financial mismanagement. Seeing the numbers in black and white, the inflated contracts, the unauthorized bonuses, the phantom consulting fees, had finally broken through her denial. Marcus had been easier to handle once I'd eliminated his access to company funds without oversight. Forced to actually work for his salary, he'd discovered a talent for hotel operations that I hadn't expected. He was currently in Miami, personally overseeing the reconstruction of the property that had been stalled for months due to permit issues. How's the scholarship program doing? I asked Diana, who had taken over the employee relations responsibilities. We've awarded grants to 12 employees' children this year, she said proudly. Maria Santos from housekeeping, her daughter just started at UCLA pre-med. James Rodriguez from maintenance, his son is studying hospitality management at Cornell. The scholarship program had been the first change I'd implemented, and seeing the impact on our employees' families had validated every difficult decision I'd made. These weren't just names on a payroll, they were people who'd worked for the Harrison family for years, people who deserved to see their loyalty rewarded. There's something else, Diana continued, her voice more serious. Victoria wants to see you. She's in the executive conference room. I found Victoria sitting at the polished mahogany table, staring out at the Beverly Hills skyline. At 35. She looked different than she had 6 months ago, less severe, more thoughtful. The designer suits were still there, but something in her posture had changed. You wanted to see me? I said, taking a seat across from her. I've been thinking about Dad's funeral, she said without preamble. About how we treated you. About the reception we excluded you from. Victoria, let me finish, she said quietly. I've been thinking about it for months, and I realized that excluding you from that reception was the moment Dad knew for certain that we didn't deserve to inherit his business. The admission surprised me. Victoria had spent months learning to work with me, but she'd never directly addressed the funeral incident. We showed him exactly who we were, she continued. In our moment of grief, when we should have been coming together as a family, we chose to push you away. We chose to make you feel like you didn't belong at your own father's funeral. Why? I asked. Why was it so important to keep me out? Victoria was quiet for a long moment. Because we were afraid, she said finally. Afraid that if you were there, people would see how much Dad loved you. Afraid that you'd say something in your eulogy that would make it obvious that you knew him better than we did. The honesty was brutal and unexpected. We spent our whole lives taking Dad's love for granted, she continued. We assumed it would always be there, no matter how we behaved. But you worked for his love. You earned it. And we were jealous of that. I never meant to compete with you, I said. I just wanted to belong. I know that now, Victoria replied. But at the time, it felt like you were taking something that should have been ours. We couldn't see that there was enough love to go around. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. I've been working on something. A proposal for expanding the scholarship program. I opened the folder to find a detailed business plan. Victoria had researched scholarship programs at other companies, calculated costs and benefits, and outlined a comprehensive program that would cover not just tuition but also mentorship and internship opportunities. This is incredible work, I said, genuinely impressed. I've also been thinking about Dad's philanthropy, she said. He gave millions to charity over the years, but it was always private, always quiet. I think we should be more public about our charitable work. Show people that the Harrison family stands for something more than just making money. The proposal was thoughtful and well-researched. Victoria had clearly spent considerable time thinking about how to honor our father's values while building on his legacy. There's something else, she said. I think we should establish an annual memorial scholarship in Dad's name. Not just for our employees' children, but for any student who's overcome significant obstacles to pursue higher education. Students like me, I said, understanding the subtext. Students like you, she agreed. Students who've had to work twice as hard to get half as far because of circumstances beyond their control. Over the next hour, Victoria laid out her vision for transforming the Harrison family's charitable giving. She'd clearly been thinking about this for months, and her enthusiasm was infectious. This was the sister I'd always hoped to have, someone who could channel her intelligence and energy into something meaningful. Why now? I asked when she finished her presentation. Because I finally understand what Dad was trying to teach us, she said. That wealth is a responsibility. That leadership means serving others, not just serving yourself. That family means supporting each other, not tearing each other down. A knock on the conference room door interrupted us. Marcus appeared, looking tired but satisfied. He'd flown back from Miami that morning. The Miami property is back on track, he announced, settling into a chair. We should be able to open in 3 months. The staff is incredible, they've been waiting for this opportunity for over a year. What did you learn down there? I asked. Marcus grinned. That I actually enjoy the work when it's real work. When I'm solving actual problems instead of just collecting a paycheck. He paused. I also learned that the employees know more about running a hotel than I ever gave them credit for. The head of housekeeping has been there for 15 years. She had suggestions for improving efficiency that will save us thousands of dollars a year. Are you going to implement them? Already have, he said proudly. And I'm talking to her about a promotion. She's earned it. Diana joined us a few minutes later, and for the first time in my memory, all 4 Harrison siblings were in the same room without tension or conflict. We spent the next 2 hours discussing business operations, charitable initiatives, and plans for the future. I have an announcement, I said finally. I'd been thinking about the executive structure of the company. They all looked at me expectantly. Victoria, I want you to head up our new charitable foundation. Diana, I want you to become our Director of Employee Relations and Community Outreach. Marcus, I want you to oversee all property operations. What about you? Diana asked. I'm going to remain as CEO, but I'm also going to continue my social work practice. I've been talking to the Phoenix Social Services Foundation about opening a West Coast office. I want to integrate our charitable work with my professional expertise. Victoria leaned forward. You mean you're going to split your time between the hotels and social work? I mean, I'm going to find ways to make them work together, I replied. Dad built a business empire, but he always said his greatest satisfaction came from helping people. I want to make sure that mission is central to everything we do. That's going to be complicated, Marcus said. Running a hotel chain is a full-time job. So is social work, I agreed. But I think Dad left me in charge because he knew I wouldn't choose between profit and purpose. I think he wanted me to find a way to achieve both. The conversation continued. Into the evening. We ordered takeout and spread papers across the conference table, planning and dreaming and arguing in the way that families do when they're actually working together toward a common goal. As the sun set over Beverly Hills, I found myself thinking about the funeral that had started this whole journey. The reception I'd been excluded from, the confrontation that had revealed so much pain and jealousy, the moment when I'd realized that my father had been watching and planning all along. I want to do something, I announced suddenly. I want to hold a memorial service for Dad. A real one, where we celebrate his life and his values. Where we invite everyone whose lives he touched, employees, charity partners, community leaders. Like the reception we should have had after the funeral. Diana said quietly. Exactly like that. Victoria nodded slowly. I think that's a beautiful idea. And I think we should announce the charitable foundation at the same time. Show people what the Harrison family legacy is really going to be about. 3 weeks later, the main ballroom of the Beverly Hills Harrison Hotel was filled with hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Robert Harrison. Hotel employees stood alongside business leaders, scholarship recipients mingled with charity board members, and our family stood together at the front of the room. I gave the eulogy I'd never been allowed to give at his funeral. I talked about his love for his family, his commitment to his employees, his belief that success was measured not just in dollars but in the lives you touched. I talked about his quiet generosity, his willingness to give people second chances, his understanding that leadership meant service, but mostly, I talked about the lesson he'd taught me in death that I'd struggled to learn in life, that family isn't just about blood, it's about showing up for each other when it matters most. Victoria announced the new charitable foundation, with its expanded scholarship program and commitment to supporting families in crisis. Marcus talked about the employee advancement initiatives he was implementing across all properties. Diana presented checks to 3 local charities that had been chosen by hotel staff members. At the end of the evening, as the last guests were leaving, the 4 of us stood together in the empty ballroom. Dad would have loved this, Diana said. Tears in her eyes. He did love this, I replied. He planned for this. He knew that if we could get past our hurt and jealousy and fear, we could build something beautiful together. Victoria put her arm around my shoulders, the first time she'd voluntarily touched me in years. I'm sorry it took so long for us to become the family he wanted us to be. We became the family we needed to become, I said. The family he always believed we could be. 6 months later, the Harrison Hotel chain was more profitable than it had ever been, but more importantly, it was a company that employees were proud to work for. The scholarship program had expanded to include mentorship and job placement services. The charitable foundation was funding programs in 5 cities. Marcus had opened 2 new properties using sustainable building practices and profit-sharing programs for staff, and I had found a way to blend my 2 passions, running the family business and continuing my social work practice through the company's community outreach programs. The final piece of the puzzle came when I received a letter from James Morrison. Dad had left one more surprise, a sealed envelope that wasn't to be opened until the 1st anniversary of his death. Inside was a single photograph, the 4 of us as children, taken during a family vacation to Hawaii when I was 12. Victoria, Marcus, Diana, and I were building a sandcastle together, all of us laughing and working toward the same goal. On the back, in Dad's handwriting, were the words, "This is the family I always knew you could be. Love, Dad." He'd been planning this transformation for years, watching and waiting for the right moment to force us to choose between our worst impulses and our better angels. He'd given me the power not to control my siblings, but to help them become the people he'd always hoped they could be. Standing in his study a year after his death, surrounded by photos of the family we'd become and the business we'd transformed, I finally understood the true gift he'd left me. Not the money or the power, but the chance to turn a broken family into something whole. The Harrison family legacy wasn't about the hotels or the real estate or the bank accounts. It was about learning that love isn't something you inherit, it's something you choose to give every day to the people who matter most, and in the end, that was the greatest inheritance of all.